Welcome, everyone. We're really excited for this. Excited to have the Ready here. Just a quick intro before we jump into today's webinar. I'm Zoe, CEO here at Common Trust. Many of the folks here know Common Trust is dedicated to supporting business owners to sell their company to their employees. So we work with businesses at the earliest stages of the planning process through actually executing the deal to eventually supporting them to really unlock the gains of employee ownership after they've transacted. So we've worked with businesses as small as 10 employees. We've worked with businesses with tens of thousands of employees. So we have completely seen the gamut here across all industries and how they choose to approach employee ownership at their company. Before we get started, I'll just share a little bit of context about today's event. Our Owners Session is really a series that's dedicated to sharing the stories of leaders and founders who've transitioned their businesses to employee ownership and what that actually looks like for them, taking it from kind of the conceptual level to what does it actually look like at a business that is employee owned. And as more founders are really exploring these alternatives to traditional exits, we found that employee ownership is becoming a powerful path, especially for those who've lived it and are really operating their companies this way. So today we're going to do a deep dive with the story of the Ready. We have Ashley and Rodney here with us. So we're going to start off with some prepared questions so we can walk through their journey towards becoming employee owned. And then we'll also have some time for folks in the audience to ask questions to them as well. So as you guys have questions, feel free to drop those into the chat. We'll be manning that on our side, and then we'll save time at the end of this session to surface up those questions to make sure that you guys are able to learn from Rodney and Ashley's journey. Why don't we get started? So as I mentioned, today we have Rodney, partner of the Ready, and Ashley, CFO, here to share a bit about their story with us, about their transition to employee ownership, why they chose it, how they went about it, and then how it's working at the business. So I just want to start with an intro for the two of you. Tell us a bit about you, your time at the company, and then maybe I'll start with you, Rodney, on the far side of that, for you to tell us about the Ready.
Yeah, sure. Hey, y'all, thanks for coming to this. Ashley and I are excited to talk to you. This is obviously pretty near and dear to our heart. And man, we learned a lot. Maybe we can spare you some of the harder lessons. So I am Rodney Evans. I am the steward of the Ready, which is our word for CEO. I've been at the company since it was less than a year old. I met the founder a long time ago and really have been with the Ready since it was about, I don't know, 6 or 7 people. And it's been almost a decade, and that's wild because I have never stayed anywhere that long and I never intended to, but here we are. Yeah. And so my role really primarily consists of doing big transformational things like this, and then being very market facing. So I co-host a podcast. I do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of client stuff to sort of represent our company in the market.
And Ashley, over to you.
Yeah, my name is Ashley Reid. I am the finance steward, which is our equivalent of CFO. I also am the business platform steward, which is basically just the operations of the Ready. It's the systems, it's the payroll, it's the finances, the reporting, strategy, all of that. I've been with the Ready about 2.5 years, which feels like 25 years at this point. But before, I've always held roles in finance and operations, mostly in like the nonprofit and social sector. So this was my first role with a consulting firm.
It feels that way because of how much fun we've been able to pack in to 2.5 years, right? Yeah.
So much.
The only reason.
Yeah.
I love that you guys call yourself stewards. I think that's a really creative approach to it. That's great. Rodney, why don't I turn it over to you? Tell us about the company, the history, what you guys do, who you sell to. Give us a sense for kind of the company itself.
Yeah, sure. So the Ready is a future of work consultancy. We generally partner with organizations in the Fortune 500, sometimes nonprofits and smaller companies, but a lot of our clients have been traditional, overly bureaucratic, overly hierarchical kinds of organizations that are looking to really modernize how they're working, modernize how people experience the organization. And so the way that we talk about this is with really big companies like Tell us your gnarliest cross-functional problem, and we will teach you a new way to execute on it, because we just fundamentally believe your ideas and your strategy are only as good as your ability to operationalize them. The Ready's been around, as I said, for about 10 years. We have been through so many chapters in that period of time that it's hard to even account for them. But it is a little bit of a unique company culturally. We are self-managing. We always have been. I am happy to talk more about what that means and what that looks like. But the TLDR is we do a lot of consent-based governance and decision-making about the most important aspects of the business. It's not just me or Ashley deciding on our own. We don't have traditional bosses or managers. And there is really a talent marketplace in the organization, which is how projects get staffed or delivered, as opposed to something that would look more like a traditional resource management function in a consulting company. We're currently, I don't know, 25 people-ish. Yeah, I always get it wrong. We've been as big as 45. We have been as small as 5. Right now, we're 25. We'll see next year what that looks like.
And that I will get into this maybe later on, but that kind of management approach, was that there at the beginning, or is that something that evolved?
It's always been there. So Aaron, who founded The Ready, was a big fan of non-traditional management and governance practices. I also came from a background where I was like researching and leading innovation teams in the same space. So he and I both came to The Ready, him in founding and me in working, with this belief that traditional command and control, over planning, et cetera, has outlived its utility, and that basically most companies that are operating, at least those founded or based in America, with any scale, are operating on an operating system that's like 100 years old. And it's just like the pace of the world and the pace of companies is not a match. And that is where so many organizations struggle. So yeah, we've always believed that a different approach to management is how people are able to do the best work of their lives, and how organizations are able to adapt as conditions change.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about the Ready's transition to employee ownership. I think one of the things that I'm excited for you guys to share, and that's candidly a little bit unique about your process, is that we are typically working with founders as part of the transition. And at the Ready, this was really a leadership-led transition to employee ownership. So tell us a little bit about the process and how you guys came about employee ownership.
Yeah, I can start with that. So as Rodney mentioned, our founder, Aaron Dignan, he stepped away early in 2023, and there was already an elected team of stewards that were managing the day-to-day, leading the strategy. So after he left, what we kind of noticed was that our legal structure, like how we looked on paper, was no longer representative of how we were actually operating the business. So again, since Aaron had already left, it was up to us to propose and design what the next iteration looked like. And because we were already managing, it wasn't that big of a difference. It was more just like, how do we get to a place where both of our needs get met as the Ready and as the exiting founder? So it was really a combination of Rodney and myself and a few other members at the Ready that managed pretty much the entirety of the scoping, the design, working with Common Trust, and the full execution of the transition. Really only bringing in Aaron for the initial conversations about like, what are our goals? What do we want to accomplish? And then eventually to execute the transaction itself. But it was really led mostly by, and I wouldn't even say just the leadership team, it was led by the company.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll definitely get into a little bit like how the rest of the company participated, or what you mean by that when you say it was led by the company. In this context, when did you guys hear about employee ownership? How did that even come about as one of the options to really map how you guys were running the business and the culture to the legal structure?
Yeah, so there are a couple things. One is, the original ownership structure that Aaron had set up upon founding was always meant to create more employee ownership than it did. So like his intention was always this as an end state. It just, the distribution of ownership was predicated on more rapid growth than the Ready ever experienced. So like the ownership just didn't get distributed to the extent that he had wanted it to. And so he and I started looking around probably early in 22, maybe in 2021, we first started thinking about like what are all of the alternatives. By the time we sort of made this decision, we were pretty far into curiosity about the ESOP, but I got a bunch of advice from other CEOs that I know to not do that. And then we met Miran Oka, who maybe is around, and she had such a similar journey to us in so many ways, except she was the founder. And there was just a lot about her company and our company that were similar, which was interesting because they don't do anything that in common. But I really like in our call with her, I sort of played for her a lot of the advice that I had gotten about the ESOP, a lot of my concerns about the ESOP. And she was basically like, yeah, this is why we went the EOT route. And so not to devalue the EOT, because I do think that it's the right structure for us. And I am really pleased with it. And there has been no looking back. But to be honest with you, there was not another compelling structure. Like when it came down to it, and Ashley and I got to this point where we were like, let's do one more round on alternatives. Like there wasn't something else we could even live with. This was it. So whatever the imperfections were, we were going to deal with them because like we just didn't find an alternative that we could stomach.
Yeah, I also just want to mention, so in our articles of incorporation, when we were originally incorporated as a public benefit corporation, the purpose specifically said that we needed to distribute ownership and economic benefit. So it was already ingrained like in the legal DNA of our company as a corporation. So remaining employee owned after Aaron left was kind of a non-negotiable for us.
Yeah, and also I want to double down on something you said, Rodney, about your conversation with Miran. So for folks who don't know Miran Oka, she runs a swim school, which is obviously very different than the Ready. And so I think that's a really interesting example about how this model can apply to different businesses, but also it sounds like you guys were talking about the ESOP versus the EOT and had similar concerns and also similar considerations in looking at the two of those.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys, I guess I'd be curious, did you guys look at other options beyond employee ownership, like a third-party sale or anything like that?
Yeah, so
all the things.
Yeah, we definitely looked at the ESOP and it was so attractive because of the tax benefits. But was so unbelievably administratively burdensome, costs a lot of money, and just didn't fit for our size. We also looked at just kind of updating and expanding our existing cap table to kind of bring it to the intended purpose where more people were owners. But again, administrative, even for a small company like ours, that work tends to fall onto one person, which would be me. I didn't want to do it. And it also just didn't feel like it was aligned with what we thought of as like ownership and structure. And we considered the possibility of selling. There were at least a couple people or like larger firms who were interested at one point. But again, like essentially what we tried to do was like go back to our original purpose, what felt most aligned, and it was the EOT at the end.
Yeah, I'll also just say, because it might not come up later in this conversation, but I think it was really important to me. And actually, this is where we love our partner at Common Trust, Sandra. And also, this is where Sandra and I occasionally like had the lowest grade friction. What was really important to me in choosing a structure and in how this is designed is that like I do not have the hubris to think that I know what future generations of this company are going to want. And I was unwilling to lock people who I have never met, who are going to be working in a radically different environment and economy when I'm sitting on a beach sipping pina coladas, I did not want to lock those people into my idea of what right was. And so with a structure like the ESOP, you are compelled to sell in that structure if the right offer comes along. I didn't want to compel people to sell. If they don't want to sell, they don't have to sell. Conversely, in the EOT, like, it definitely biases toward being perpetual and not having a sale. And I was really clear, and a giant pain in the ass, that like, if future employees decide, or if we do, who knows, decide that selling is the right thing for the business, they should have the freedom to do that. And to be honest, in all of the scenarios that Ashley laid out and others that were considered over the years, it's really hard to find that kind of flexibility. Like, it's really hard to find a structure that doesn't require you to predict the future, which none of us should be doing right now.
I think that's fair. I think all of us are struggling to predict even 2 years from now at this point in time.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm curious to hear then. I think what we've heard from business owners is different companies have chosen the EOT for different reasons. And even in your responses right now, I'm hearing a couple different things from you guys. I'd be curious, at what point in time did you really solidify, like, yes, this is the right choice for us? And what features of the EOT made it? Maybe it's that Rodney, about just like not having to predict the future, but what was it for you guys?
I mean, there was one thing, Ashley, I don't really remember what the moment was. I think you and I just at some point were like, we got to do this. Like, we got to just like go. One of the features that was really important to me, that was not really available in a lot of the other alternatives we considered, was this idea of naked in, naked out. So I have been part of these transactions from lots of different angles. Many of you who are listening to this right now, who are business owners or sit in my seat, know that like the fact that you have to do a financial transaction every time you want to make a change to ownership with a bunch of alumni who may not be so fond of you, or may have financial, who knows? The point is, I don't want to deal. Like, I just think the idea that like the people who are here are sharing in the profit, and when those people leave, it's over, felt very flexible to me. Like, it felt like an elegant solution to ownership, which is like, you can get at tenure, you can get at contribution through the way that you do profit sharing, through the way that the company is distributed in a sale. You can get at it in other ways, but you don't have to do it through this fixed cap table that really constrains you in terms of how you interact with new and departing members of your company.
Anything you want to add to that, Ashley?
Not necessarily, and Rodney already mentioned it earlier, but I do think the conversation with Mirren was one of the moments, because I remember almost immediately after Rodney and Aaron had gotten off the phone with her, she was like, I think this is it. This is the path. So that was probably like the actual moment.
Nice. Mirren is a great evangelist for sure. Well, so tell us about, I mean, the Ready also like clearly has some very specific business goals and cultural goals, which I think is actually a commonality we see with a lot of businesses we work with, that they have a very opinionated perspective on their culture. How did that shape the decision to move forward with the EOT?
Yeah. So I mentioned before, the Ready is a purpose-driven public benefit corporation. We were founded on principles of autonomy, equity, shared responsibility. And we have and will continue to operate with distributed authority. We use self-management and self-governance practices. So it was like the EOT extends that philosophy, makes it our legal structure, and embodies the culture of the collective stewardship that we've already been practicing for a while.
The only thing I'd add to that, and this is a little bit nerdy and a little bit woo-woo, so bear with me, is just like at a philosophical level, we call ourselves stewards. I liked the idea of the Ready being something held in a trust that we and other employees and future employees are the stewards of. And like, I'm involved in some family trusts, and you know, when you're around family trusts, like the idea is like your generation stewards this thing for the next generation. You're not there to extract everything you can from it. You're definitely not there to screw it up while it is under your purview. And you don't own it. It's not yours. And I liked this idea like that the Ready doesn't belong to us. It is its own entity, and we are its custodians for the period of time that we are. And that just like philosophically, that makes sense to me in terms of the relationship that as a CEO, I wanted to have with this business.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think that like philosophical lens maps really well to the structural, tactical component of naked in, naked out, which is employees don't necessarily have to buy in, and if they leave the company, they no longer have right to any of those benefits.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so I would love, I mean, you guys have mentioned a couple principles of your organizational design already, which I think is really fascinating. And my nerdy side is I love getting into the nitty gritty side of these. So I'd love to jump into that side as it relates to the EOT journey. I think one of the things that's really interesting about you guys is the company already had a lot of these principles and culture in place. And as you guys have said, the EOT really just solidified that in the legal structure. How did your existing culture and structure influence your approach to designing the EOT?
Yeah. So I would say, you know, the Ready is made up of org designers and systems thinkers. That's what we do for a living. So we were pretty persnickety about how this was going to go down, and we wanted it to be great. Like we didn't, you know, there was not, Sandra did not ever send us a single template that we did not rewrite for ourselves to make it feel like it was us and it was our genetic material. We wanted this to feel like the genetic material of the company, not like a legal structure. Like we wanted it to feel like something more. So a few things that I'll share that I think people who go through this journey, I would say you should do, whether you're org designers or not, even though certainly it helps. One is we took a very sprint-based approach to this work. So there was sort of like the pre-sprint where Erin and I did a lot of figuring and assessing of options and negotiation around pricing and things like that. Then there was and then there was sort of like the discovery period that we did with Sandra, to Ashley and I together. And then there was a period where like I bounced and Ashley got really deep into the financial due diligence. She and Sandra worked really closely together. No one else was involved. She just did that. And then when that was over, I assembled a sprint crew from inside the Ready to do the design and to work on the roles, the governance structures, the decision rights, the purpose statement, et cetera. And we were just fortunate that the people who ended up on that sprint crew, many of whom opted in, were our Jedi steward, who really kept us honest about the like equity in this structure and how we were designing it. A former attorney who's now an org designer, which can't beat it. And a member who used to be one of our clients and had gone through a failed ESOP transformation and had very strong opinions about what not to do. And so those three and I sprinted for a couple of months to do all of the blocking and tackling of like, what are the principles? What are the words? What are the roles? What is the member representation? How do these decisions get made? Blah, 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 blah. And then Ashley came back in and we like elected the, and then basically it went back to being me, Ashley, Erin, and our legal team papering what the sprint crew had designed. And so that was sort of like the arc. I would say it probably took, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months, something like that, soup to nuts. And it worked really well because we had broader representation than just one or the two of us. It felt like something the company was pursuing, not like something we were doing to the company. And it allowed us, because we're small and like Ashley and I had other stuff to do, it allowed us to take breaks. So like Ashley finished diligence and she was like, over to you. I'll see you in a month and a half. And that worked really well for us.
Yeah, I'll also share, we really honed in on this idea of like MVP design. So like minimum viable product. How can we make the fewest choices up front while still remaining compliant, which is also why we chose the EOT. Rodney, you forgot to mention your favorite phrase of like, this is the least shitty version of capitalism. Excuse my language.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like we can still be a company in like a culture we don't necessarily agree with, and this is like the least shitty way to do it. So we wanted to reserve as much authority and flexibility as possible inside the company. And we didn't want to lock future members or stewards into decisions we were making today, as Rodney mentioned earlier, which I think kind of embodies our principle of people positive, complexity conscious, this idea that like all of our members and all people are seen as trustworthy and motivated and deserving of power. And the complexity conscious of like, we're not going to make decisions today without knowing like what the changing conditions will be over time, and like designing in a way that allows for adaptability and flexibility and resilience.
And I would just say to that point on like the most like nitty gritty for those listening, the last thing that Ashley said, if you go through this, do that. Because first of all, it saves you a pile of work. And there's a bunch of stuff you can figure out later. Like there's just a bunch of stuff you don't have to figure out, even though you'll feel like you should. And for us, like, for example, in the trust agreements, what is typical is to name the roles on a leadership team. Our structure was in motion at the time. We're always changing stuff around. And so I was basically like, can we just call it the leadership team and say in the trust agreement, which comprises whatever governed roles are on the leadership team at that time under whatever name it's being called. That's good enough. Like that's good enough to get it done. And so we kicked the can on what the profit sharing formula would be, what the dissolution formula would be, who was on the leadership team. Like we did minimum viable design everywhere and it made things faster. It hasn't held anything up and it just gives you a chance to like take the thing for a test drive before making a bunch of decisions without data.
Okay, I have two follow-up questions on this. The first one, Rodney, when you talked about the sprint-based approach and bringing in different members of your team to participate in this, how did they react? How did you frame this for them? Like, what was the messaging?
Yeah. So, I mean, everyone knew that we were doing this. This was not a secret. As soon as we picked this structure, we told people that this was how it was going to go. We started sharing videos, information about what it was. Sandra came to an all company meeting to answer people's questions. Like this was all very transparent. And this is how we do things generally. So this isn't like in a traditional firm where like the CEO calls you to do a special project. Like people expect to be included in work that is going to ultimately impact them and of which they are the end users. So I think I literally posted a Slack message with a role description that was like sprint crew member role and what it was going to require in terms of hours, in terms of content, in terms of what authority we would have, blah, 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 blah. And just asked for hand raisers. And mostly I got the hand raisers that I needed. And then I asked the one person who had a legal background because I was like, he's going to be able to read stuff that I can't read.
Yeah. I mean, related to that, I guess one thing I'd love for you guys to reflect on is aligning the governance with the decision making in this transition. How did that play out for you guys?
When you say decision making, do you mean about the EOT or like what we
Exactly. Yeah, because I think part of what you're talking about that's so interesting, and I think one of the really unique parts about the EOT is this MVP approach that you guys talked about, which is like, how did you decide what was important to codify and like how to design that such that it allowed this dynamism? And what did you say, this is something we can push down the road?
So again, this is baked in our DNA. We have a proposal template that is used by anyone in the company at any given time. If you have a proposal to a change in how we do things, you have to start by kind of saying like, what's the tension? What are you proposing? What are the risks involved? What's the timeline? What other options were considered? So it's like we've got this process down. So I do think that showed up a lot in the design as well, because it was all proposal-based decision-making. where again, it wasn't just Rodney and I in isolation making these decisions. It was all very much like, this is our proposal, and making sure people caught up as we went along.
And so, like, for example, like, I wrote the board role proposal and who I thought should fill that role and brought it to the leadership team. But the sprint crew wrote like the governing body work and the decision making architecture and brought that to the leadership team as a proposal. So it went in multiple directions, but the idea here was that we were all signing up for the decisions that felt more one way, the things that were like, we can't really go back from this. This is kind of like, this is for sure for now.
Yeah. I mean, part of what I'm hearing from you kind of consistently throughout this is you guys already had this kind of ownership culture at the company.
Yeah.
Like this wasn't actually a significant change beyond reflecting that in the structure. I guess if that's the case, like what changed for employees? Did you guys notice a difference in kind of their ownership mindset? How did that play out?
I mean, personally, as an employee or member of the Ready, I kind of joked that as soon as the transaction was done and the paperwork was filed, I didn't really think about it anymore because it was like, it didn't change how we operated from day to day. It was more like, get to the end, get the paperwork finalized, and then just like back to business as usual. And I wouldn't say there's anything fundamentally different in how members were showing up either, because again, we were already stewarding as a membership. It was collective steering. So there wasn't a huge day-to-day adjustment.
I think that's right. I think the only thing that I noticed, Zoe, is like here and there when there's, when there's a proposal about spending something, I think people have more of an orientation now to profit sharing. Because in our old structure, when dividends were paid, obviously it was a formulaic distribution triggered by the founder. That's just how dividends work. In this structure, because there is a lot more flexibility baked in, and because we can reinvest first, we can do whatever we want. What I see now is when someone brings a proposal forward about making a hire or changing some part of the compensation stack or something like that, there tend to be more reactions from members that are like, what about profit sharing, than there were before. Because people feel like we've committed to this structure. We've determined that profit sharing is like, we're doing profit sharing even over dividends and even over individual bonuses and even over other kinds of retirement. Like we've bet on this horse. And so I think people sort of have it top of mind when we're talking about spending other money on stuff.
Mm-hmm. And so related to this, you guys are probably exceptional in that you guys are organizational design experts, which is not everyone who's going through this process. With that lens, I'd just be curious to hear what advice you have for other business owners looking at this process and specifically with that organizational design lens.
One of the biggest pieces of advice I would give is to make sure that you have a legal team that you really trust, especially if you're steering in a way of like, what's the minimum viable design? Because that usually doesn't equal the most risk averse or 100% compliant. Like, well, it's compliant, but it's like, sometimes lawyers will just tell you what's standard, what's best practice, what other people have done, and won't always kind of talk about like what else is possible. So we did actually have to change our legal team in the middle of the process. And I'll say like after we made that switch and we found someone who like was like a legit lawyer and still willing to kind of work with us on like, what's the other way that we can design this? And of course, working with Common Trust too. So like having an advisor who knows the ins and outs of EOT because it's such a new concept and a new structure in the US. Having an advisor and a legal team, even if you're the best org designers in the world, you still kind of need those two partners on your team.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would say, and I don't know if people are listening, I don't know if this skews more owners or more people like me, but I think one of the things that really was foundational to how smoothly this went is that Aaron, the founder, and I were really clear on outcome. Like, I knew what he wanted and needed. He knew what I wanted and needed. Both of us agreed that the first principle of this thing was that the ready existed and that it was properly employee owned. Because, like, look, in any transaction like this, you're going to get annoyed about certain things. Like in any great deal, both people lose a little bit of what they want. That's just like, that's the reality of transactions of any stripe. But I would say, whichever side of this transaction you're on, if you're on this call, like, do the work up front with the counterparty to be really clear on who you're designing for. Because the truth is that, like, we weren't designing for Aaron, we weren't designing for me, we were designing for the company. And whenever there was a hard decision to make that he and I didn't totally agree on, we put the company first and said, what is going to be the best for the future of this place? And that is a really helpful working agreement to have as you go through something like this, which of course brings up a lot of emotions, a lot of history, a lot of stuff for people. Like, this is a big decision for an owner. And I think I wouldn't go into this process without sort of having that like alignment and the trust to the extent possible. Like, Aaron was really like, I appreciate that you're going to do this for us. Go to it. Like, I just think you have to do enough contracting around this that it's hard enough in the best case scenario, which is what we had. So, like, do the work, try to deal with the conflict up front, figure out who you're designing for before you get into diligence.
Nice. I mean, related to that, so one of the things you just said, Rodney, is one thing that was important to you is that it is properly employee owned. We've talked a lot about the Ready's culture. Tell us a bit about the structures, and let's get kind of granular here, like the structures that really lead to employee ownership success and properly employee owned for you guys. What does that mean?
I'll start.
Yeah.
We really prioritized like preserving boundaries and autonomy. So that is like innate in our structure. So we were clear about what sits inside of the trust authority and what stays in the membership in the company. It means that like trustees are accountable for stewarding the long-term purpose, while like day-to-day steering and decision-making is still like with the people who are doing the work. We also thought carefully about like, how does the trust connect to our existing routines of collective steering? So like, how can the trust and the EOT fit into our cadences instead of the other way around? So that means like the really getting clear on the decision-making process inside the trust and ensuring like the people represented, like member representation was really important. And I also, like Rodney alluded to this earlier, but this idea of designing around principles and purpose instead of roles. That's also like, that is how we structure ourselves. So instead of starting this process in designing the trust and saying like, who gets that role? It's like, what is the purpose of the trust? And like, what principles must guide how it works? And then from there, you back into like accountabilities, and then eventually roles and structure emerge, but starting with the principles first and not the other way around.
Yeah, I think that's right. The only thing I would add is I think, with ownership comes accountability, right? And like and real authority. And so when we were designing the Trust Stewardship Committee and the board of directors role, which we didn't, I mean, we kind of had it, but like, it's more codified now. And like what each of those bodies could decide, what they had to decide together, we created tension on purpose between those two groups. So like the Trust Stewardship Committee's job is to uphold the purpose of the trust, and the board's job is to look after the company. And sometimes those things are going to be in conflict, and that's by design. And because the Trust Stewardship Committee is mostly people elected from our company. It can be anybody elected from our company. You are basically creating a check and balance against the group of people in the board who hold the most explicit authority, and you are keeping the check with elected roles that can hedge what the board wants to do. And that was by design. And I think that's what ownership means. Like, money is money, but like, can people actually stop decisions they disagree with? Do they have a real voice and vote? Like, that's where the rubber meets the road with ownership. And so we baked that in to how we set up those bodies.
Yeah, I think you're getting at something really interesting here as well, which is like, they're the principles which are really important. And the other check and balance here is, how do you make sure this is financially sustainable for the business, this buyout? Maybe Ashley, I'll ask you that question.
Yeah, this is what I led most of. So we were really fortunate, and we had a very like healthy cash on hand balance going into the transaction, which gave us the ability to pay like a meaningful chunk upfront to Aaron as he was exiting. And in doing so, we were able to move all of his shares, which were majority owner of the company, into the trust. So we were able to establish that like majority stake right away, instead of dragging it out over multiple steps. And again, Sandra and I did a lot of financial modeling to try to figure out like what's the right balance between paying the rest to Aaron over a certain number of years versus still being able to distribute profits early on. That was one thing that Sandra kept really pushing us on, which we were so grateful for, was like, you don't want to delay the like realization of the EOT, which mostly the impact is the profit share. So it's like, we don't want the founder buyout to happen first and then profit share like years later once we're done. So it was a really good balancing act. We also gave ourselves plenty of time, and probably more than we needed, to pay the remaining balance. Of course, this was all through negotiation with Aaron. It wasn't just us deciding. But we didn't know at the time last year, like what was coming market wise. And like, thank God we structured it the way we did, just with the way the economy is right now. Like we were more conservative than we had to be. But we were still like, we were able to execute and get both sides met.
Yeah, so I want to invite folks to start dropping questions into the Q&A, because we're going to shift to audience Q&A in a moment. I have two final questions. The first of which is, for folks on the call, what is the advice you have for them going into a process like this? You've already answered that in some senses, but maybe just round it out for us.
I mean, get aligned between the seller and the buyer before you decide that you're going to do this. Get really clear on who is going to play what role and how that's going to go. And include employees, especially. I think a lot of you listening probably don't have a culture like ours to start with, because we are very atypical in terms of how we work. And so I don't think you can't expect that a structural change is going to create a culture change. It's just not. Like, you are going to have to build the connective tissue between those two things for it to mean what you probably want it to mean. And I think the only way you do that is to include employees in the design from the beginning. Because it's just not going to mean something to them unless they have their fingerprints on it.
And let me just follow up on that one, because I can imagine if I'm sitting in the seat of like, wow, these guys have created this incredible culture at their company that really teed them up for success, but I'm not sure I have that at mine. How do you take those first steps in such a like consequential process?
I mean, look, if I were a CEO of a more traditional company and I was thinking about going down this path, I would start with a design session with a group of no more than 15 on the purpose of the trust. Just see what happens. See if you can get that far. See if you can figure out why you're doing this and what this thing is for. That'll be like a pretty good litmus test for employee participation, in terms of like co-designing something.
Yeah, I was going to say hire an org designer. like the
Do
ready.
you guys know someone?
Also an opportunity. Also an opportunity.
Shameless plug. But I mean, actually, seriously, because we had talked about like how important our team was. And we just happen to be org designers, but I do think that if we were a more traditional company, just having the legal team and Common Trust as the advisors, there's still a big gap that exists if you don't even know how to organize around purpose.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, my last question, and then I've got a bunch of audience questions.
Yay.
Yes. So last one, you guys are through this transition. How's it going?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I am surprised how little it comes up,
Yeah.
but in the best way possible. Ownership is now part of like the backdrop, but it doesn't dominate our day to day. We just keep running the business as we have.
I think that's it. It barely feels like a thing. And I think for me, and I probably can speak for Erin here, like I think the fact that this decision was made, we did the work to be done, we know how the next few years are gonna go, is just a weight off. You know, just like everybody can just like do what they want to do and go live their lives. And because he and I worked for a long time to try to find a structure that would work for us, I think it was a big relief when we did, and then when it was viable, and then when we got through it.
Yeah. All right, let's shift over to questions from the audience. First one, what is the long-term EOT value to employees? Like what are employees building with this EOT?
I think the first thing is this idea of we are protected as a company from an external sale at any given time. So it kind of gives us a little more safety to continue to experiment and evolve the structure. We can take a little more risk, shared risk, knowing kind of like the outcome. And I also think the profit sharing, like it gives people incentive to stay with us instead of exiting, where like a traditional cap table, there's no real incentive to stay.
All right, next one. Do all employees have to agree to be a part of this process?
Like the trust itself?
Yeah, like going through this.
No. I mean, I'm sure it's different in every company. Like, as much as I'm talking about participation and the ways in which various members of the Ready did really impact the structure of this and how and all of the details, the decision to do it was mine and Erin's. Like full stop.
Right.
Yeah.
So the negotiation, like that was actually really with Erin and with you guys, and then
Yeah.
you got to invite employees into the design process for what they were a part of following that.
Yeah, no employee got to be like, I do not want to be part of the, like, that was not part of the, that was not part of the discussion.
All right, some questions related to the trust and to your sprint committees. Is that something that you guys compensate?
Ashley, did we?
Or is it part of their role as employees at the company?
I can't remember.
I can't remember.
Specific, but it's not uncommon for us to propose roles outside of your like core role at the Ready, especially like time-bound activities that require a lot of your work. I wouldn't be surprised if we did pay like a flat or fixed amount for people to participate.
Yeah, I don't remember if we did or not. But like Ashley said, it would not be uncommon for us to do that. To say like, you know, you are going to get X amount a month for the duration of this sprint to do this work with us.
You
know, they're going to watch this recording and be like, we didn't get paid, but we'd like to.
In our experience, it's all over the board. So let's see. How are employees interacting with the trust today?
So we have our 2 elected roles. So on the Trust Stewardship Committee. So those are 2 members. Outside of that, I think, again, as Rodney had mentioned, like members are contributing more to conversations about spend and bets and investments with the outcome of like how much will be left over for profit share. So I would say they're like indirectly working with the trust in that way. But outside of the elected roles, it's kind of just the backdrop now.
I mean, there are a couple of projects that are going on, I would say, that are related. So like, for example, I think it was out of the TSC that you guys went and asked for a profit sharing proposal, right?
Yep.
Like you guys, the TSC, the Trust Stewardship Committee included other members in creating a proposal for how the profit sharing formula should work.
Yep.
And we are required, Zoe, you can tell us why. We're required to have a bunch of like EOT language in our handbook, but we didn't have a handbook. So we now have a small group of people who are creating a whole handbook that includes other stuff too that's important to us, that also includes the trust language. So like as piecework related to the trust comes up or is the stuff that we didn't do in the design because we were doing MV design, there are people who had nothing to do with the setup doing that work.
Yeah. Okay, I have one last question, which is very you guys. Do you have any direction to share on where to find co-design processes for smaller companies? Sounds like this is also an org design process as well.
Where to find co-design processes?
Great question.
It is a great question. I mean, if I were not a designer and I was trying to take this approach right now, I would be using AI a lot. And I would be looking at people like the Ready and other people who do this work. And I would be spending a lot of time in AI being like, how would a company like that create a purpose? How would a company like that structure authority? How would a company like that do profit sharing? I just think that like, I mean, AI is like my teammate on my desk that I use every single hour of the day. One of the best things about it is that you can have it act like an expert in anything. And I would probably include it as my org design teammate if I didn't have one.
Ashley, anything you want to add to that?
I don't think I mean, as a non-org designer, I would just say I would go to my coworkers and ask them for resources. I mean, we have a lot of interesting stuff on our website. We have a blog where there's articles sharing a little bit more about our methodology and process. So you can always just start there too.
Awesome. All right. Rodney, Ashley, I'll let you guys, if you have any final words of wisdom, pieces of advice, or things that you want to share, and we'll just close out with that.
I mean, one thing that I don't want to restate anything we've already talked about, but one practice that we have at the Ready that I think really served us well and anybody can do, whether you're an org designer or not, is we have what are called monthly ships, where a lot of us who hold roles, like who hold steward roles, write a Slack post to the whole company prior to our all company meeting that is talking about like what's up and like what's happened and insights and changes and whatever. I would say if you are stewarding this transaction and this transformation, write a monthly ship to the employees every month, whether you have something really important to say or not, because changes like this tend to bring out paranoia in people. Most people have gotten burned at some point in their lives by some kind of like acquisition or transaction. And just being, and also people tend not to engage because it's like legal and financial and boring until they feel like it's going to impact them. So they just stay like low grade paranoid until the big reveal. So I would say write a monthly ship, just being like, here's where we're at. Here's what we did. Here's what's next. Here's where we're at here. And then have a forum where people can ask questions, invite your common trust partner to answer them for you. I just think that something that is as sort of easy as that will help with the change management of something like this that can feel a little it can feel a little theoretical and it can feel a little bit like it's happening outside the building. And I think you got to like bring it home.
Yeah. My brain immediately goes to the financing and like the feasibility, because I'm sure that might be a barrier for either founders or companies that are even thinking about something like this. And I would just say, like, be creative, because there are so many different ways to make this transaction happen. It doesn't have to just be like you write a check, you hand it over, and then it's done. Like there's financing, there is like seller financing or like bank financing. And I think there's like always room for negotiation. So if it's something you really want to do, like stay creative and open to other ideas.
I think that's really well put and well coming from the finance steward of the org. All right, I think we're going to wrap up there. Rodney and Ashley, thank you guys for joining us. I feel like, we talk to business owners every day at Common Trust who are going through this process, and I feel like it is so valuable to hear how other companies have gone through this, how they made it real for them, how they made it reflect their organizational DNA. And I think you guys did a really good job just talking through how you customize this process. So thank you for joining us. To everyone who joined for this conversation, thank you. And if you have any follow-up questions, of course, please feel free to get in touch with us at Common Trust.
Awesome. Thanks for having us, Zoe. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye.